Hello and welcome to the sixth and final of the James Ford Lectures on British and Irish History, which this year are on Ireland, Empire and the Early Modern World. I'm particularly delighted to be speaking from the ballroom in Ivy House on St Stephen's Green in Dublin. This was once the townhouse of the Guinness family and is now home to the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. I'm really grateful to Minister Simon Coveney, Secretary-General Niall Burgess and colleagues for their very warm, albeit virtual, welcome. Much as I wish we could have a live audience here in the ballroom, current restrictions mean that I'm imagining you're all joining me here in this exquisite setting for the lecture and for a glass of wine later. Today, I want to reflect on the impact of empires on Ireland in the early modern period and how empire has been remembered. Over the course of these lectures, I have had much to say about Brian Friel's Making History. In Making History, as in so many of his other works, Friel was responding to colonialism. The significance of where the play was premiered in 1988 is worth noting. In the Guildhall, the symbol of imperial power and target of at least 2 IRA bombs during the 1970s, and in the divided and walled city of Derry, or Londonderry, as the plantation town developed by the City of London is also known by some. As you've heard, Making History offered a message of reconciliation at the height of the Troubles in Northern Ireland and invited audiences to use their history to imagine another future. In my lecture today, I want to explore how empires shaped the lives, the landscapes and the mindsets of those living in early modern Ireland, and to conclude by reflecting on how imperialism, as experienced during the early modern period, is remembered today. First then, shaping lives. Ireland's place in the early modern world is well illustrated through the examination of the contents of a wash pit at Rathfarnham Castle. Archaeological excavations in 2014 unearthed a veritable treasure trove of over 17,500 well-preserved artefacts, probably dating from the second half of the 17th century. This extraordinary discovery offers a fascinating window into elite material culture, but also highlights Ireland's global convergences. Built in the 1580s by Archbishop Adam Loftus, the first provost and founder of Trinity College Dublin, Rathfarnham Castle was typical of the fortified mansions constructed across early modern Ireland. Protestant, well-connected and on the make, members of the Loftus family were amongst thousands of new English settlers who colonised Ireland from the 1530s and made their fortunes often by dubious means. The Rathfarnham hoard provides a glimpse into the cosmopolitan material world, both public and private, of the Loftus dynasty and their household. It highlights the interconnectedness of the early modern world and how the commercial activities of the English, Spanish, Chinese and Mughal empires extended to the periphery of Western Europe, and how activities of these early modern empires impacted on Ireland. The survival of coins, trade tokens, lead weights and wax seals tell a story of international commercial engagement. Particularly noteworthy is a silver piece of 8 mined and minted at Potosi in Spanish Peru and dated 1655, along with a jeton struck at the end of the 16th century in Nuremberg, one of Europe's greatest centres of production. Even more stunning is this Colombian emerald ring, which was excavated along with gold brooches, rings mounted with semi-precious gems, amber beads, and finely engraved sleeve buttons made from silver, gold, and glass. More intimate is a grooming kit, toothbrush, hairbrush, and earwax spoon, together with the handle of a razor, a fragment of a sponge, and a glass jar apparently containing the remains of red lip or cheek rouge, which was derived from cochineal insects, which were native to Mexico. Smaller luxury items were recovered from the Rathfarnham pit as well. Miniature glass figurines, probably from Nevers in France and the Venetian island of Murano, and exquisite blue and white Chinese porcelain, along with cruder Dutch and English copies. Extant fashion items recovered included leather and wooden shoe parts, heels, uppers, soles and buckles. Worn down heels suggest that these shoes had multiple owners, with mistresses passing on once precious pumps to their daughters and maids, and fathers handing down their shoes to their sons and servants. Though no textiles survive in the damp wash pit, archaeologists recovered wooden and metal buttons, pins and clasps. These fastened undergarments, dresses and jackets, no doubt made from locally manufactured woolens and linens, or maybe from exquisite silks and satins tailored in London, or colourful Indian calicos, which of course were the height of fashion across Western Europe in the later decades of the 17th century. The survival of lace bobbins and bodkins invoke images of intricate lace collars and cuffs. We've already noted the anglicised wardrobes of Hugh O'Neill, Earl of Tyrone, and of other members of the elite. Clodagh Tate has shown just how widespread English apparels had become, with people distinguishing in their wills between English and Irish items of clothing. Unsurprisingly, no bulky household furnishings found their way into the wash pit, while other highly prized possessions, elaborate wall hangings, damask drapes and bed covers or Turkey carpets, so common in the inventories of other grand houses, presumably perished. We know that men like Gerald Ainger and Richard Hedges brought Indian textiles to Ireland. For example, in 1675, Ainger sent his brother, and I'm quoting here, an Indian tent made of Indian calico. One can begin to imagine how exotic gifts such as these delighted both the grandees of Dublin and the locals of rural Longford. An inventory of the possessions of Lady Catherine Percival of Burton in North Cork reveals, quote, a profusion of Indian textiles. Large and small trunks were packed with painted calicos, coarse calicos, calico curtains, bedspreads and quilts, along with Indian silks, while elsewhere Indian textiles provided coverings for windows, walls and floors. According to Mark Cable, the frequent arrival of East Indiamen at Kinsale over the course of the 17th century explains the presence of such Indian fabrics throughout Munster, including at the Earl of Orrery's grand house at Castlemartyr. Properties belonging to the Duke and Duchess of Ormond, Dunmore House, Clonmel, Kilkelly Castle and their apartments in Dublin boasted similar calico furnishings, white Indian damask curtains and cushions of Indian striped silk. These Ormond inventories also list precious items of furniture shipped to Ireland from the East. Intricate screens from India and chairs, cabinets, chests, hangings and squabs or sofas from Japan, which were all delicately carved. Some appear to have been lacquered, others painted or inlaid with silver or ivory. Sadly, none have survived, though a trip to the Victoria and Albert Museum in London provides a glimpse of the exquisiteness of these sorts of items. Extant ceramics suggest that the Loftuses kept up with the latest trends, drinking tea from Asia, from Chinese porcelain cups and saucers, together with coffee from Yemen in the Middle East, from fine English-made coffee cups. From the early decades of the 17th century, sugar from the plantations in the West Indies was used to sweeten these, and hot drinking chocolate, the beverage of choice for the very rich. After the Restoration, the Irish poet Nahum Tate wrote his Panacea, a poem upon tea, which celebrates urban, civilised life for those who could afford luxuries like tea, coffee, chocolate and spices. Here is his account of the tea pouring ceremony. On burning lamps a silver vessel placed, a table with surprising figures graced, and china bowls to feast their sight and taste. The genial liquor decently poured out to the admiring guests, is dealt about. Scarce had they drunk a first and second round, when the warm nectar's pleasing force they found. Thus our tea conversation we employ, where with delight instruction we enjoy, quaffing without the waste of time and wealth the sovereign drink of pleasure and of health. Though dating from a slightly later period, Sir Robert Cowen's armorial china is extant in the family home at Mount Stewart in County Down. We know from Cowen's vast archive in the Public Record Office of Northern Ireland that the service, which he commissioned in 1722 when he was living in Bombay, cost £100. Now that's the equivalent of £12,000 in today's money, and it took 3 years to fulfil the order. Back in the Rathfarnham wash pit, fashionable flint crystal goblets manufactured from the 1670s, probably in London using innovative glass-making technology, were also found. These were used to drink spirits and wines, and excavated bottles, shown here in the middle, suggest that wine was produced, presumably in France or Spain, especially for the castle. Other drinking vessels held beer, the beverage of choice for the majority. Scientific analysis of the food remains in the Rathfarnham wash pit, especially the bones, shells, seeds, nuts, together with other research led by Susan Flavin as part of the Food Cult Project, provides fascinating insights into everyday diet, as well as insights into cultural identities. It also shows how colonisation played a significant role in shaping the culinary history of Ireland, which became increasingly anglicised, yet also understandably adapted to suit local circumstances. The inhabitants of Rathfarnham Castle ate meat, fowl, game, fish and foods made from a variety of cereals, especially oats and wheat, along with delicacies like apricots and peaches grown under glass, and marrows and courgettes, plants from the New World that spread to Europe during the early decades of the 16th century as part of the Columbian Exchange, shown here on the map. Pineapples, for example, were reputedly grown under glass for the first time in Ireland in the 1660s on the Clotworthy estate in County Antrim. Even more exotic items like coconuts and jars of Indian mangoes reached Irish shores. Though there's no extant archaeological evidence in the wash pit, people who lived in Rathfarnham Castle probably used a variety of Asian spices, ubiquitous in Ireland by this period, in cooking, preservation, and for medicinal purposes. In a deposition of July 1645, William Bailey, a merchant from Hackettstown in County Carlow, lamented the loss of spices, cinnamon, cloves, mace and nutmeg, which he claimed the insurgents had stolen and then used to flavour their morning draughts. Research has shown that potatoes, indigenous to the Andes, probably reached Ireland via Spain, and not with Sir Walter Raleigh, as the myth has it, during the first decade of the 17th century. Within 50 years, potato growing was reasonably widespread, but remained a luxury food until the early 19th century, when it became the staple for the poor. There is a wonderful recipe from the 1660s for potato pie in the recipe book of Dorothy Parsons from Birr Castle, which involves lots of sugar, dried fruits, rose water and spices, especially cinnamon, plus eggs and freshly churned butter. It is the world in a pie. The recovery of a large number of clay pipes at Rathfarnham Castle, shown here on the right, and in other archaeological digs, suggests that smoking proved a particularly popular pastime. Research by Susan Flavin and her team on human remains from this period shows how teeth were worn down from chewing on the pipe. Tobacco was, of course, native to the Americas, and by the 1620s and 1630s, it was widely used in Ireland and elsewhere. Some, including King James VI and I, abhorred the habit, while English and Irish writers alike ridiculed the obsession with tobacco. A New English commentator, Barnaby Rich, in the Irish Hubbub, describes the English colonists in Ireland as representing the dregs of England and particularly condemned their addiction to tobacco smoking. Rich's descriptions of smoking would deter anyone for life, but just listen to this. First, it is drawn in at the mouth, and then it is snuffled out at the nose, whereby the air is infected with such a loathsome fume that those that be bystanders cannot draw their breath, but they must suck down some of that filthy vapour that hath been blown out, if not through a pocky nostril, yet for the most part through a snotty nose. The scale of the Rathfarnham hoard was exceptional. Other finds recovered by the many archaeological excavations that occurred on the foot of recent developments, especially during the Celtic Tiger years, in both urban and rural regions of Ireland, are also hugely important. While underwater archaeologists like Connie Kelleher and her team are recovering some of the wrecks of the early modern vessels, along with their cargoes, that litter the Irish coastlines. In 1699, a Royal African Company's ship, the Amity, was wrecked in Dunworley Bay in Cork, en route from London. You can see its lading list here. One Negro, probably a personal servant to the captain, was saved and sent back to London. The archaeology, combined with analysis of wills, inventories, customs records, and literary sources, including bardic poetry, illustrate the changing consumption patterns associated with empire. Of course, exotic imports stood as signifiers of civility, luxury, and wealth, and provided an income stream in the form of taxation for the state. By the early 18th century, ever-increasing customs duties were placed on tobacco, linen, muslin, calicos, lacquered goods, molasses, treacle, tea, coffee, and coconuts. Hardly surprisingly then, smuggling was rife. Plunder taken by pirates and privateers was traded on the black market. There were always buyers for imperial goods. I'd like to move now from how empires shaped lives and diets to shaping landscapes. Across Ireland, colonial initiatives transformed the environment and the physical landscape. The urbanisation and proto-industry associated with these years, along with a demand for timber, resulted in extensive deforestation. And it's no coincidence that wolves were reduced to extinction by the mid-17th century. A frenzied programme of building, castles, mansions, schools, churches, jails, roads and bridges, together with the enclosure of lands and the planting of orchards and gardens, transformed the countryside, resulting in new patterns of rural nucleated settlements and the emergence of major urban ones. An early 17th century poem recorded the change in the Ulster landscape with, quote, "The mountain all in fenced fields, fairs are held in places of the chase, the green is crossed by girdles of twisted fences." From the later 17th century, regional power brokers adopted English and Scottish architectural styles. You've already seen Rathfarnham Castle. In 1618, the 4th Earl of Clanricarde spent £10,000 he could ill afford, it was a fortune, building a grand fortified house with mullioned bay windows and an ornate interior at Portumna, near Galway. These great houses transformed the physical landscape and stood as powerful testaments to the civility of their owners and the privileged position these power brokers enjoyed. It's little wonder then that the insurgents targeted for destruction these fortified mansions and other symbols of the improved and civilised landscape after the outbreak of the rebellion on the 22nd of October 1641. A good example of this was the Earl of Cork's house at Lismore in County Waterford. Today, only the gatehouse survives. I want to shift my focus slightly to those who made good on the foot of empire, whether in the Atlantic world or in Asia, and reinvested their wealth back in property back home. Many who migrated stayed in close touch with their families and, as we've seen, sent home exotic gifts and luxurious goods. Others clearly had an ambition to return home, to purchase property and to invest their profits in securing higher social status. We see this very clearly in the case of Gerald Ainger, who made a very considerable fortune during his years in Bombay and Surat, and supplied his brother, the Earl of Longford, with much needed capital for his business as a property developer in Restoration Dublin, and especially for the development of the city's first suburb, around Ainger Street, which today is a very bustling thoroughfare. Number 9 Ainger Street is the only one of these 17th century houses to survive. It's in awful shape. However, when you go through the front door, it's like stepping back in time. And you can see in front of you the marvellous 17th century staircase. Ainger may be remembered as the founding father of Bombay, and thus of modern British India, but he was also Ireland's first nabob. He may have been the first nabob, but he certainly wasn't the last, as the work of Fionnuala O'Kane, Andrew MacKillop, Edward Tegan and others has shown, as they explore the relationship between Irish country houses and empire in the 18th century. Drawing on a vast and untapped archive in the Public Record Office of Northern Ireland, Edward Tegan's recent doctoral thesis recovers the career of Sir Robert Cowan, whose Indian fortune bought an Ulster estate for his nephew, the first Marquess of Londonderry. The son of a planter and originally from Derry, Cowan spent his early years in Lisbon, and this, together with his Presbyterian associations, helped him to secure favour and office in the East India Company, serving as Governor of Bombay from 1729 to 34. And of course, that's where he made his fortune. Though of a slightly later vintage, James Alexander, later Earl of Caledon, spent his career in Bengal. The vast fortune he made there funded his estate in northwest Ulster and his title. And his vast archive is also in the Public Record Office of Northern Ireland. These are physical monuments built on the back of empire that no doubt impressed people at the time, reminding them of the status of their owners and shaping over time attitudes about these dynasties. And it's to shaping minds that I now want to turn. I'd like to explore, in as far as the evidence allows, how people living in early modern Ireland experienced and perceived empire. It's important to remember that the majority of people were unable to travel beyond their locality, and so maps, travel literature, prose and plays framed their engagement and perceptions of empire. We know from household inventories, library and auction catalogues that maps and globes were highly prized possessions in the houses of the elite across Ireland. Maps, often illustrated with representations of indigenous peoples, like these by the likes of John Speed, which circulated so widely, fired imaginations about the exotic. These captured colonial knowledge by offering visual proof of dominance, the fortifications, the walled towns, while also functioning as a tool to shape or manipulate popular perception. Of course, as I've already suggested in earlier lectures, these images also had a significant ideological component that presented subtle messages concerning the civility of colonial subjects. The Americas and Ireland are wild and disordered, while India may have crumbled, even if it retained hints of a formerly civilized state. Visual representations and maps were often published in travel accounts. Globetrotters made the foreign familiar to a domestic audience. Occasionally, these men had direct experience of Ireland. For example, here, John Ovington was an English clergyman who had been educated at Trinity College, Dublin, and later published an account of his voyage to India and sojourn in Surat. In this, he stressed the perils to the health of Europeans posed by an apparently extreme Indian climate, and you can see at the bottom there the English graveyard in Surat. If India was a land of opportunity and a sensual exotic promise for early modern people, it was also a locus of extraordinary danger, and death was always imminent. For others, Ireland itself was used as a simile, which according to Alison Games, and I'm quoting here, was proximate and problematic, both familiar and foreign. The exotic were found not only far from home in India or Jerusalem or America, but right across the Irish Sea. At the turn of the 17th century, Fynes Morrison, secretary to Lord Mountjoy, travelled extensively throughout Europe, North Africa, the Middle East and Turkey, but saved his greatest scorn for the mere Irish, whom he regarded as filthy, rude, barbaric wild beasts, and their women as drunken and subversive sluts. The assiduous gathering of information about native societies also occurred in America. John White's vibrant watercolours of the Algonquins were later published by Thomas Heriot, who accompanied Sir Walter Raleigh on the first voyage to Roanoke in 1585. Hardly surprisingly, direct comparisons were made between the distinctive culture, dress and hairstyles of the indigenous peoples in Ireland and America, and of the commercial opportunities their natural worlds afforded to enterprising colonists on both sides of the Atlantic. This new world was a frequent and in many ways omnipresent topic in early modern Irish libraries, and books like Richard Hakluyt's The Principal Navigations, along with many others, appear to have circulated widely and brought the world into the hands of readers. Extant catalogues from Ireland's early modern libraries in Trinity, Marsh's Library, or the Bolton Library, now in Limerick University, demonstrate that Irish readers had access to the original versions of travel literature published all over Europe and their English translations. It was a truly global body of literature, spanning Africa, the East and West Indies, India, the Ottoman Empire, Persia and Madagascar, and connecting readers to the debates and discussions regarding the exploration and exploitation taking place in Asia, the Americas and the Caribbean. The coverage was also diverse and included astronomy, geography, history, botany, topography, medicine, linguistics and zoology, along with particular interest in the practical usage of commodities like spices, tobacco, tea, sugar and chocolate. Vivid stories of the lives, customs and practices of indigenous peoples and accounts of tropical flora and exotic animals, tigers, elephants, rhinoceroses, colourful birds and dragon-like reptiles excited intellects and triggered curiosity. One of the most popular writers of the day who tapped into this fascination with the exotic was an Irish author called Richard Head, who's shown in this slide holding a globe. He's best known for his raunchy novel, The English Rogue, which was first published in 1665 and immediately became a bestseller. The life story of the hero and narrator, the English Rogue, mimicked Head's childhood experiences in Ireland. Having fled Carrickfergus on the foot of the 1641 rebellion, the rogue ran away from school and began a debauched career in England as a petty thief and highwayman. Caught, he was deported to Virginia, but then managed to travel east to Surat in India, then on to Ceylon, Siam and Java, where he married, quote, an Indian black. He then settled in Bantam, became a prosperous trader, found God and his true Englishness. The language of empires, dominions, provinces, viceroys, conquest, civility, improvement, learning, scientific discovery and knowledge gathering, together with a curiosity for the exotic, pervades the writings of Jonathan Swift. In Gulliver's Travels, Swift wrote, and it's quite a long quote, it says, "Natives are driven out or destroyed, their princes tortured to discover their gold, a free license given to all acts of inhumanity and lust, the earth reeking with the blood of its inhabitants, and this execrable crew of butchers employed in so pious an expedition is a modern colony, sent to convert an idolatrous and barbarous people." Even if Swift like other members of the 18th century elite, did not see himself as a member of the colonial caste, his depiction of the Yahoos includes several elements of the still prevailing view of the wild Irish in racial and behavioural terms. These fictional texts show, as Daniel Roberts has noted, quote, remarkable continuities in their grapplings with the savage implications of empire and its precarious grasp on civility. Equally, Swift's satirical pamphlet, A Modest Proposal, suggests that the only way for the indigent Irish to escape poverty is by fattening up their babies and selling them to the butcher. This makes, as Ian McBride reminds us, for uncomfortable reading and challenges assumptions about Irish barbarism and English civility. It reflected an Ireland where cattle were regarded as more precious than people. Of course, Irish writers, especially the poets, had for generations voiced their opposition to imperial rule and colonialism. The passage of time did not dull their voices, something vividly captured in a collection entitled A Light to the Blind, written at the turn of the 18th century. The author wrote that the Irish, and I'm quoting here, are treated by the ruling powers not as subjects, but in the quality of slaves. That an ancient noble nation is this enslaved for to support a mean colony therein planted by the regicide sword of Cromwell. 'Tis a burning shame to an ancient illustrious nation to see themselves like worms trod upon by a mean and regicide colony. The authorship of A Light to the Blind is uncertain, though it seems likely it was written by someone very close to Peter Plunkett, 4th Earl of Fingal, possibly his uncle. Peter's mother was a lady in waiting to Catherine of Braganza, the wife of Charles II. His grandmother was Mabel Barnwell, daughter of Mary Bagnall and niece of Mabel Bagnall, who had married Hugh O'Neill, Earl of Tyrone, in 1591. This mention of Mabel and Hugh brings me back to where I began this series of lectures 5 weeks ago, and to Brian Friel's play, Making History. It also brings me to the final part of my lecture, how we remember empire in Ireland today. On the 25th of February, President Higgins gave a lecture that examines the motivations and practices of imperialism and of resistance to it. This was part of a series of reflections which examine the period 1920 to 1923, including the War of Independence, the Civil War, and the partition of our island. In a very recent op-ed in The Guardian, President Higgins wrote, and I'll quote here, "As I reflect on the topic, I'm struck by a disinclination in both academic and journalistic accounts to critique empire and imperialism. Openness to and engagement in a critique of nationalism has seemed greater. And while it has been vital to our purposes in Ireland to examine nationalism, doing the same for imperialism is equally important and has a significance far beyond the British-Irish relations. Such consideration also helps explain a reluctance in former imperial powers to engage now with their imperial past and to examine that past with descendants of those previously colonised, many of whom still live with the complex legacies of that colonialism. To be fair, a number of us have been trying. Seamus Nevin's excellent recent piece in the Irish Times picked up on some of the issues that I had also raised in my own op-ed from the 29th of December. And of course, reflecting on the legacy of imperialism is what I've been trying to do in this series of lectures, albeit for an earlier period. Yet in Ireland, events that occurred in the 16th and 17th centuries remain very much part of our DNA. Something that really came home to me when we published the 1641 depositions in 2010, and as we began to see memory, I think, finally becoming history. On the 22nd of October 2010, the anniversary of the outbreak of the rebellion, Mary McAleese, the President of Ireland, launched the 1641 Depositions website and an accompanying exhibition on Ireland in turmoil that was in the Long Room in Trinity. That evening, the President acknowledged that, quote, "The events of 1641 have been the subject of considerable dispute and controversy. Facts and truth have been casualties along the way, and the distillation of skewed perceptions over generations have contributed to a situation where both sides were confounding mysteries to one another." The President concluded her perceptive remarks with the recognition that we are, even after the publication of the depositions, unlikely to agree a common version of history, but we can agree that to have a common future, a shared and peaceful future, there is nothing to be gained from ransacking the past for ammunition to justify the furthering of hatred and distrust. There is, however, everything to be gained from interrogating the past calmly and coherently in order to understand each other's passions more comprehensively, to make us intelligible to one another, to help us transcend those baleful forces of history so that we can make a new history of good neighbourliness and understanding and partnership between all the people and traditions on this island. Building bridges and reconciliation were the hallmarks of Mary McAleese's presidency, something that was fully realised during the state visit of Queen Elizabeth II to Ireland in May 2011. The launch of the 1641 exhibition, however, afforded her an opportunity to make a very powerful statement on the importance of acknowledging our shared and contested past without being bound by it. Ian Paisley, the late Lord Bandside, who in the past had repeatedly invoked 1641 to stir up anti-Catholic sentiment, also attended the launch and responded to the website and the exhibition. In his speech, he said, "Here are the tragic stories of individuals, and here too is the tragic story of our land. To learn this, I believe, is to know who we are and why we have had to witness our own troubles in what became a divided island. A nation that forgets its past commits suicide." He continued, his voice almost in a whisper and so different from the thundering tones of his prime, by taking a swipe at the Labour Prime Minister Tony Blair, who, to be fair, had done so much to promote the peace process. He said, "Before us in these cases is the real hand of history, and tonight that hand reaches out beyond the page, beyond its century, and touches us. Now the question is, what will we do? Let us grasp that hand and hold fast to it and introduce its work to our schools. If we learn the lessons of the past, we may use them to unlock a stable and promising future for everyone on this island." The fact that Ireland is now at peace has allowed our leaders to make speeches like these and to embrace with such enthusiasm an historical project that until relatively recently polarised institutions of the state, its subjects and scholars themselves. A generous grant from the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, the Reconciliation Fund, allowed us to take the depositions into the classrooms of Ireland, which is so very important if we're to forge a shared future on our island. A decade on, the 1641 Depositions Project has enabled new modes of interpretation in which early modern Irish historiography can break free of the legacy of imperialism and the civil wars of the 1640s. The depositions are also allowing us to explore on an interdisciplinary basis issues surrounding atrocity, massacre, and ethnic cleansing across history. I'm currently working on a collaborative project on women and sexual violence with a historian of 19th century America, a Columbia historian called Stephanie McCurry, and a human rights lawyer, Rosemary Byrne, at NYU Abu Dhabi, who's an expert on atrocities committed in Rwanda and the former Yugoslavia. We believe that the importance for the contemporary world of understanding why atrocity, massacre, and ethnic cleansing occur cannot be overstated. By studying these past occurrences of atrocity and massacre across time and across geographies, and by attempting to unravel why they occurred, how the victims survived, how they remembered, how perpetrators were punished, and how communities were reconciled or not, our understanding of the present can be more fully informed. I'm going to conclude this lecture and this series on Ireland, Empire and the early modern world by sharing with you 4 images which both capture the moment in which we are in and some of the key messages I've tried to explore in these 4 lectures. These are by the incredible Irish artist Rita Duffy, who is currently the creative practitioner in residence at the Trinity Longroom Hub, where until very recently I served as director, and so I've had the privilege of getting to know Rita. Rita Duffy's work is about identity, and much of it responds to colonialism. So we've much in common, aside from a shared experience of growing up in Belfast during the Troubles. On the 6th of January 2021, the Feast of the Epiphany, a crazed mob of extremists, egged on by a sitting president, attacked the US Capitol building, the symbol of American democracy. In this painting, which is still actually unfinished, but Rita captures the horror of the moment and the trauma of the preceding months. For us in Ireland, it's also a reminder that white supremacists in the United States, shown here celebrating, include those who celebrate their Irishness and have misleadingly suggested that Irish indentured servitude in the 17th century Caribbean equated to white chattel slavery and thereby distort the true meaning and misery of black slavery. The campaigns around statues must fall and Black Lives Matter, again so powerfully depicted here, have also found their mark in Ireland. And attitudes are changing, something that I see very clearly in our universities, including my own in Trinity. Yet we need to acknowledge that at least 30% of African Americans with Irish heritage will find their roots in dark places, and that racism is widespread throughout Ireland. The second work is this remarkable mural that was originally commissioned to hang along the Fermanagh-Cavan border. It is entitled The Brexit Raft. However, it was felt that seeing the 2 flags, the Union Jack and the Irish tricolour, fly side by side was simply too provocative at a moment when Brexit threatened to undermine the Good Friday Agreement and the ongoing peace process in Northern Ireland. So instead, on the 30th of January 2019, the day that the UK left the European Union, we hung Rita's raft on the side of the Trinity Longroom Hub. Yet we remain very much at sea. The ongoing saga of Brexit simply illustrates how the Irish question never dies. It just gets reformulated. And as you know, the historic and human links between our islands run very deep. From the mid-16th century, 350,000 people from England, Scotland and Wales migrated to Ireland. By the early 18th century, society in Ireland was ethnically diverse, with nearly 1/3, 27% of the population, of immigrant stock. Equally, people from Ireland have been migrating to Great Britain for centuries. The 2001 UK census shows that nearly 1 million people living in Great Britain were born in Ireland, and that roughly 6 million people living in Great Britain had an Irish-born grandparent. This figure exceeds the current population of Ireland. Now, given our shared histories and our entangled pasts, what does it actually mean to be Irish at the turn of the 21st century? Let me finish by sharing two other drawings by Rita. Here we have the mantle, which of course symbolised Irishness and was worn by men and by women. As we know, English commentators believed that the mantles hid the nakedness of the wild and subversive Irish women. The need to replace the mantle with the cloak and to cover nakedness drove imperialism in Ireland and elsewhere in the early modern world. Finally, here's Rita's drawing of the lock used during the siege of Derry. The siege was triggered after a Jacobite force led by the 3rd Earl of Antrim, himself a grandson of Hugh O'Neill, failed to capture the town in December 1688. 13 apprentices shut and locked the gates. The siege began in earnest in April 1689 when the town again refused to surrender to King James II. The siege lasted 105 days, from the 18th of April until the 1st of August, and to this day the lifting of the siege is commemorated, a potent reminder that for some, events of the 17th century are still very much alive. Yet here, the creative artist, like the playwright, imagines an alternative narrative. The lock is open. The possibility of a shared future is within our grasp. Thank you for your attention today and for the many emails and messages that you've sent me over the course of the past 6 weeks. I'm looking forward to the days when we can meet and when we can debate and discuss in person. So for now, stay well and goodbye.